Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our way through Far East Homeric Greek, looking at the content of Lesson 21, where we will continue with the participial forms, the middle and the passive, the perfect active, as well as the active forms of τίθημι. We'll conclude by looking at some adjectives of the third declension, ἀληθές, ἀληθές, βελτίων, βέλτιον. Okay, here we go. So the middle passive and future passive participles have the endings of the adjective agatos, agate, agaton, os, on, with which you should be familiar by now. But between your verb stem and these endings, there occurs the suffix of the middle participle, which is mu, epsilon, nu. So if we look at these forms, the present middle is lu en menos on, and you see the thematic vowel omicron before the mu, epsilon, nu suffix. And then in the future middle, lu sans menos on, you see the sigma before the omicron of the thematic vowel. And then in the first aorist middle, lu sans menos, you see the sigma of the first aorist, but the alpha before the mu, epsilon, nu suffix of the middle participle. Likewise, in the second aorist middle, you see the second aorist verb stem, lip, from lepo, and so lipomenos, with the return of the omicron of the thematic vowel. Then going to the perfect middle, you see the reduplicated stem, lelu, added directly to menos, on, without any thematic vowel. And then in the first future passive, lelu te sans menos, on, you see the theta of the passive, but then the alpha sigma plus the omicron thematic vowel that tips you off to the fact that you're looking at the future passive. Likewise, in the second future passive, bla be sans menos, excuse the extra accent, about to be harmed, you see as well the sigma before the thematic vowel omicron. So it's very important to always go back to these tense suffixes because they will give you your key to recognizing the various forms and consolidating your sense of the various tenses by looking at the most important element, and that is the tense suffix of the verb. So again, in the present system, we always have the thematic vowel omicron epsilon. In the future system, sigma with omicron epsilon. In the first aorist, sigma with alpha. In the second aorist, the thematic vowel omicron epsilon. In the first perfect system, we have kappa with alpha, but we'll see that it's a little different in the participle. In the second perfect system, we have alpha, or no stem at all, or no suffix, I should say. In the perfect middle system, we have no suffix, but the endings are added directly to the stem. And then in the first and second passive, we have theta, eta, or eta alone. And in the future passives, we have theta, eta, sigma with the omicron thematic vowel, or alpha, sigma with the omicron thematic vowel. So again, this chart of tense suffixes found at Smythe 455 is very important to consolidating your sense of the very complex verb system of Greek. Okay, So the accent of these perfect middle passive participles gives one another clue, and that is the fact that the accent is not recessive, but lands on the second from the last syllable. So you have le, lu, manos, le, manos, pe, pragmanos, from luo, lepo, and praso, respectively. So this will be another tip-off that you're dealing with perfect passive participles, the middle of the perfect tense participle. This will be another tip-off. Okay, now on to the perfect active participle. This one really stands out because it's unique. And so you see that if you were to look at just the nominative and the genitive singular of the masculine, you're looking at omicron sigma for the nominative masculine in the nominative and the vocative, but then omicron tau, omicron sigma in the genitive of the singular of the masculine. And so that omicron tau of the genitive is going to behave as your stem throughout both the masculine and the neuter. So you see, let's just look at the masculines. Lelukos, lelukotos, lelukote, lelukota. So here are your endings of the third declension, os, I, a, genitive, dative, accusative, and then in the plural, lelokotes, lelokoton, lelokose. You always have the weirdness of the sigma making the tau disappear, but here without any lengthening of the vowel. And then the accusative, lelukotas. So again, we have these third declension endings that you should be used to now. Es, on, se, as. Likewise, in the neuter, you have lelukos, the omicron as opposed to the omega for the nominative and vocative. And as always, the nominative and the accusative of the neuter will be identical. So lelukos, lelukos, and the plural lelukota, lelukota. But then in the genitive and datives, they are exactly identical with the masculines. Now in the feminines, however, you have strangeness occurring because of the semivocalic iota, but nevertheless, if you just learn these forms and recognize that you're using the first declension endings with alpha consistent throughout, as, I, on, I, on, ice, as, these forms will present no problem. But le, lu, guia, le, lu, guias, le, lu, guiai, le, lu, guian, le, lu, guiai, le, lu, guion, le, lu, guiais, le, lu, guias. So these perfect active participles are a little bit odd and unique, and but the reduplication helps you to recognize them. And of course, as we read the Iliad, we will point them out when we come across them. So far in the Iliad, we've seen these middle participles: ulamenein, lu somenos, has domenoi, epoi komenein. And so pause the video here and see if you can tell me what gender, number, and tense each of these is. Very good. Okay. Now, we're going to look at the aorist passive participle again. We saw this in, I guess I'm not sure what line, but hogar basile e kolotes, referring to Apollo being angry at Agamemnon, Hogar, Basileia, Kolotes, and there we had the masculine nominative Kolotes. But again, this has our familiar format of the masculine and the neuter working with the new tau stem. So you have ace, entos, ente, enta, entes, enton, ace, entas, and then the neuter, en, entos, ente, en, enta, enton, ace, enta. But then in the feminine, you're back to first declension endings with a iota semivowel having created this strangeness that results in sigma and the lengthening of the epsilon to asa, ases, ase, asan, asai, ason, asais, asas. Okay, my accent is wrong in the feminine plural nominative, but I will beg your indulgence there. So, but these endings of the aorist passive, they are shared with, first off, the present active participle of títhημι. So, you see tetes, tetentos, tetente, tetenta, etc. The exact same endings. And these are added to the reduplicated stem of the present with the te, the tau iota. But then, looking at the second aorist active participle of títhημι, where you have the simple theta epsilon stem, you see tes, tentos, tente, tenta, and tentes, tenton, tese, tentas, etc. So these endings, learning these endings of the aorist passive participles, you're learning at the same time the endings of títhημι in the participle of títhημι in the second aorist active and in the present active. So these are worth getting your mind around. Okay, so if we look, just to round out things, at our middle and future passive participles of títhημι, we see títhemenos, teisomenos, temenos, tetemenos, tetesomenos. And I've taken this display of the principal parts of títhημι from Smythe's Index of Principal Parts, and you'll see that knowing the principal parts sets you in a position to recognize these forms when you see them. So, as I've said elsewhere, your knowledge of Greek is only as strong as your knowledge of the principal parts, your ability to recognize them when they occur. And for most students who fail in Greek, it's because they don't give sufficient attention to the principal parts of verbs. So I encourage you to review again and again the videos that I dedicate to reviewing those principal parts. Okay, so now let's switch gears from verbs to adjectives, or I shouldn't say that because participles are adjectives with verbal adjectives. But let's switch to just straightforward adjectives of the third declension. And so we see at Smythe 291, you have certain adjectives that belong to the consonant declension, but only have two endings. That is, they have two endings because the masculine and the feminine share the same endings. So most such adjectives have stems in epsilon sigma, the nominatives being ace or s, or in omicron nu, the nominatives being on or on. And so we see here we're going to deal with aletes, aletes, which means true, euddaimon, eudaimon, which means happy or blessed, and vελτίων, βέλτιον, which means better. So looking at the first, ἀληθές, because this stem is actually in epsilon sigma, we have the sigma disappearing between the epsilon of the vowel of the stem and the vowel of the ending. So you can see this clearly in the parenthetical forms that are given of the genitive and dative singular, as well as the genitive plural, where you see the genitive singular ἀληθές and the dative singular ἀληθές, and you will see those forms in Homer and Herodotus and elsewhere, and even the accusative singular ἀληθέα, you see that in Homer as well. Whereas in Attic, you will see these forms, the closed forms where the contraction has occurred, so you end up with ἀληθές, ἀληθούς, ἀληθέ, ἀληθέ, ἀληθές, reading those masculine and feminine forms in the singular. So when one is just reading Homer or Herodotus, you don't have to pay a lot of attention to the rules of contraction, but they become important when you're reading Attic or the New Testament. And so I will be dedicating a video soon to going through the laws of contraction of vowels as Smythe presents them. But for now, we'll just start by being aware that these adjectives exist in open, uncontracted forms and in closed, contracted forms. So you see, as always here, to continue our exposition, that the neuter is just the pure stem, ἀληθές, ἀληθές, nominative and accusative. The genitive and dative forms are shared with the masculine and feminine, ἀληθούς, ἀληθέ, or ἀληθέως, ἀληθέ. And then moving to the plural, the neuters is ἀληθέα, open, ἀληθέ, contracted, ἀληθών, ἀληθέσε, and then ἀληθέα, ἀληθέ, contracted and open. So likewise, the masculine, feminine, plural, you have the uncontracted forms in the nominative all the way through, ἀληθές, ἀληθέων, ἀληθέσε, ἀληθές, ἀληθές. And again, you have to watch out for those forms in Homer and Herodotus, although they actually are easier than the Attic forms. So coming up in line 45 of Book 1 of the Iliad, we're going to have the line tox homoi sin ekon pe repe a te paretrein, and this is just going to refer to the bow and arrows that and the quiver that Apollo has on his back as he approaches to wreak vengeance on Agamemnon's army. And this word pe pere a, we see this open or uncontracted form of the feminine singular accusative of pe re base, which means covered on both sides. So he has a paretrein, arrow case, a container for his arrows on his back, which is covered, like capped on both sides, so the arrows don't fly out when he moves about. So this these adjectives in epsilon sigma are very important, and you have the added complication that you have to be aware of the contracted and uncontracted forms as you move across Greek literature. But it's something that one just gets used to by seeing it and remembering it and recalling it and reviewing it, like everything else in Greek, because it's not something you just learn and then have. It's something you're always fighting to retain. So some of the more popular verbs that are like this, aletes, are sapes, clear, eutukes, lucky, eugenes, highborn, asthenes, weak, enkrates, self-restrained, and pleres, full. And these are very, very common adjectives in Greek. And then you see at the beginning of the aletes, in the neuter can mean indeed. And I'm sure that's occurs quite a bit in Plato. Okay, so next we have the adjectives with stems in Omicron nu. And we're going to start with eŭdαίμων. And you see that this is pretty much behaves the way you expect a third declension adjective to behave, insofar as your stem of mu omicron nu just receives the endings os, I, a that you expect it to receive. But then in the neuter, those genitive and dative forms are shared, but then you have eŭdαίμων, omicron nu, eŭdαίμων, omicron nu for your nominative and accusative singular, and then your vocative in both masculine, feminine, and neuter is eŭdαίμων with a omicron nu. And likewise, in the plural, you're going to have the endings s, on, and then se, and as in the masculine, feminine, and in the neuter, a, on, se, a, added to eŭdαίμων. And so these are pretty recognizable and predictable if you're lucky enough to have consolidated those endings of the third declension well enough. So, like eŭdαίμων are decline mnemon, mindful, agnomon, unfeeling, aphron, senseless, pepon, ripe, and sophron, prudent. Okay. So, likewise, and this is important with a new complication, we have the example of vελτίων, which is the word or one of the words for better, and it too has a stem in omicron nu, but a complication here is that you have these contracted forms, as you see in the accusative singular of the masculine feminine. You have two possible forms, βελτίωνα and βελτιώ with the omega. And I'll talk about the alternate forms on the next slide. But likewise, in the nominative and accusative of the plural, you have alternate forms, βελτιώνες, βελτιούς in the feminine and the masculine, and in the neuter, βελτιώνα, βελτιώ, that is the same alternative that you had in the accusative of the masculine, feminine, singular. Now, this is no doubt, again, making your head spin a little bit, but when you encounter these in text, that's when you're just forced to go back and look at your Smythe and review it. And this is why, again and again, I tell you, it's so important to have a copy of Smythe's, because it's just going to be your go-to instrument for reviewing all these fine little distinctions as we actually move forward in Greek literature. So let's conclude by looking a little more closely at these alternative forms and what is actually going on. So you see in the masculine, feminine, accusative singular, and in the neuter, both the nominative and accusative plural, you have these two equivalent forms, βελτίωνα and βελτιώ. And what has happened is that the nu has dropped and the Omicron and alpha have united to form omega. And this result of omega from Omicron alpha is one of the rules of contraction, which is found explained at 51a of Smythe. And likewise, the other alternative forms that you see, or the two forms, Beltiones and Beltius, they are a result of the same thing, that nu dropping out, but here we have Omicron and Epsilon coming together to form Omicron Upsilon. And again, Smythe 51a explains that. And this alternative is found in the masculine, feminine, nominative, and accusative plural. So, what can I do but apologize for the complexity of Greek? But that's why it's such a great accomplishment to actually be able to read Greek, and such a sign of intellectual diligence, if not just straightforward raw intelligence. But diligence can go a long way. So keep on working hard, don't give up, and I will see you again soon. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.